Hello, hello, hello. All right, hello. So my name is Andres Glusman. I'm responsible for community, product, and strategy at Meetup. Now, our challenge at Meetup is to take people from this to this, or these, right? And these are some of the hundreds of thousands of meetups that are occurring every day or every month throughout the world. And our goal is for there to be a meetup everywhere about most everything, so that no matter where you are, there's a meetup within hours, or within miles of you, or this, to allow you to get to what you want, to allow you to do something you're absolutely passionate about. Now, the way we measure our progress towards that goal is through a proxy measure. And this proxy measure is RSVPs. Now, we're at a lean conference, and so of course you should bust me right now, because this is the ultimate vanity metric. Yeah, boo, good. But I'm using it to illustrate a point, which is that for years, we've been busting our butts trying to see this number go up and to the right, and we've had some pretty darn good success, but it's been a nice linear curve. And if you notice, something interesting is happening in the last year, which is that we've sort of seemed to find an elbow in that curve, and it's bending upwards in a pretty dramatic way. And that started right around there. And what happened right around there is that we went from dabbling with customer development and lean methodologies to actually fully embracing them and making them a central part of how we work. So I'm going to share with you 3 stories about that transformation, some myths that we encountered along the way that I wish somebody had shared with me, and hopefully you'll avoid the pains that I encountered. So let's get started. Boom. All right, myth number 1, people give a damn about lean. Eric wrote a book. It was a bestseller. Congratulations. That's awesome. But when it comes to actually selling it into my own organization, this is what happened to me. So about 6 years ago or so, I basically found out about this book, Steve's book. It's a story with a lot of early adopters in lean that we read it over a weekend. We were enthralled. It changed our lives. It was a horrible read. It was really difficult to get through. And sure enough, we all, but we loved it, and that sort of became a badge of honor. And like Ron, I came into work that next Monday, and I sat down with our head of product at the time, and I said to her, I said, Maya, look, I've got this great new process that we have to go through. All we have to do is go through these 18 steps, and guess what? Each one of those has an iterative loop that you get to go through, and as you pass through loop to loop, our odds of being successful are going to go through the roof. Isn't that awesome? And she looked at me like I had 2 heads, right? And she was right. And so I went home, and I was really dejected, and I drank a few beers that night, and I was thinking about it, and I was thinking that she was absolutely right, because it turns out that I was selling her a process, and nobody wants to buy process any more than they want to buy a root canal, right? But what I realized is that I didn't need people to buy into a process. I could just start doing it. And so I did. So that week, this guy, Paul Miller, happened to show up in our offices, and he wanted to get involved with a private beta of something we were working on. And I said, look, I'll jump you to the front of the line if you let my team sit with you and watch you get it off the ground, just try and set it up. So he said, sure. So we jumped into this conference room here, this conference room at Meetup. He sat at that chair. I sat directly across from him. We projected his monitor up onto the wall, and we just had a conversation as he was going through and struggling to get through the start of this new product. So we learned 2 important things that day. 1, the product we were thinking about launching was absolute crap. It really was. We ended up killing it a few weeks later. But the other thing we learned is that there was something extremely powerful in this approach that we were taking, in terms of, which is really customer development, but instead of us trying to get out of the building, we happened to bring Paul into the building. So we said, hey, let's do this again next week. And so we started doing it weekly, and then twice a week, and then 3 times a week. And now we've actually instrumented ourselves so that it's been so successful. We're doing about 600 sessions a week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there's about 4 sessions happening every single day. And our goal, by the way, it's going to cost us about $30K, which is about how much it costs to have an outsourced usability shop run you 8 sessions. We've open sourced the how to do this. If you Google lean usability, you should be able to find the playbook. But generally, our goal is to shorten the amount of time it takes from anybody in the company thinking, I wonder how somebody would react to this, to actually watching them react. And the reason is that we believe strongly that there's this thing called this Malkovich bias, which is the tendency to believe that everyone uses technology the same way you do. Right? And so if you use an iPhone, you can't understand that Droid exists. You can't understand that people outside of Gmail don't have threaded conversations. It just blows your mind. But in essence, it shifts the conversation from knowing how I would use something to from how do I use something or how do you use something to us both talking about how would she use something. And that's a fundamentally different conversation. So lesson number 1, or reality number 1, is that people do not give a damn about lean. They give a damn about their work. And what's happened is that as usability has taken off, people have kind of gotten hooked on the sauce. They really enjoy seeing where they were so fundamentally, where their assumptions were so fundamentally flawed, that it's just become a natural way of working because they want to do their job better. 2, people want to test things. So when I think about testing, this is a myth, by the way. When I think about testing, I think about this. I think about Bunsen burners and beakers and things blowing up and explosions. And I'm also a social scientist, so the idea of being able to use a social laboratory that is Meetup to affect millions of people and see if you can change behaviors is so fascinating. But the reality is that I've found when I tried to talk to people about testing at Meetup for a while was that people don't really like testing things. They like building things, which is actually a lot more fun. You can build things more quickly, and you're always right when you're building in some regards. But the problem was, to make it worse, is that we actually even had a culture, and we still have a culture that I'm pretty proud of, that we want to make big bets, and we want to change and be willing to take large risks. And somehow the notion of testing felt like you were just tweaking at the edges, like you were just doing things on the periphery, which is, you'd hear quotes like, well, I guess I'm not really that psyched about spending my time running split tests. Because it's really pretty dull compared to other things you could be doing. But we persevered, and we did it anyways. And so we started by testing easy things. And so along the way, we started by testing some changes in a sales funnel. We ran 10 experiments, and 9 of them failed, as we would expect. But one of them managed to get a 10% lift, and that was pretty cool. So people perked up a little bit. And then we tested some subject lines. We saw a 7% lift. And we tested some buttons and some onboarding flows and some other changes. And basically, the more we tested things and failed along the way, for each one of these little wins, there's a dozen failures behind it, but we got enough tests in. But as we started doing that, the mentality or people's attitudes towards testing changed fundamentally. And it was kind of exciting. And actually, now at one point, you start walking past people's desks, and this is what you'd hear, oh, let's test it. And that was pretty damn cool. That can be a problem, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But it was pretty damn cool. And so what's really interesting about it is that it's also shifted fundamentally our way of thinking about failure, which is the thing on the left is a refrigerator magnet, which is what would you attempt to do if you knew you couldn't fail? And basically that's the wrong attitude. Because instead of trying to avoid failure, we should really be thinking about embracing failure. Because the most likely endeavor for any creative project you're thinking about is that there's something that is going to aim directly at it that will make it fail and split it in 2. Right? And you could have an attitude of saying, oh, geez, well, I hope if I just move gingerly towards it really slowly and the conveyor belt moves super slow, that maybe the bad guy will look away and I'll be able to avoid failure. But the reality is that it does, in my experience, every single time I've tried to delay the inevitable or delay the failure of the thing that's because I'm nervous about it, the more I find that I just fail anyways, and I'm miserable the entire time thinking about it, because that just causes a ton of stress in terms of just waiting for the bad thing to happen. So instead, really what we've learned and what we're doing is we've learned to actually embrace that failure and to go after the things that are likely to cause us to fail as fast as we possibly can. Because if we're going to fail as often as we do, we need to get enough trials in. And that gives us the opportunity to get the trials in. All right, so the reality here is really not that people want to build. It's not just that people want to build things, but it's that people want to build things that people use. And when we refocus the conversation around that goal, then it actually becomes extremely obvious that, of course, you want to test things and build big things because you want to test and make small mistakes so that you can make huge make bets on big things that actually aren't all that risky. And that's been a fundamental change to how we think about ourselves in the company. All right, the third and final myth, is that you can test your way to a great experience. So earlier I said how psyched I was that everybody said, yeah, let's test it. The problem with let's test it is that testing your way to an experience often leads to something like this. All right, who knows what this is? Shout it out if you know. Yeah, what is it? It's the Homer Simpson car, exactly. Thank you. And so what this is the car that Homer Simpson would design for himself if he could take everything that ever worked in any car that he's ever been in and mash it together, including the little bowling guy in the ornament, which I think is pretty cool. When you design purely through iteration of tests, you end up with a complete mess and a complete incoherent experience. And at Meetup, design has actually been something that over the last year we've made a much stronger priority. It's something that we did not prioritize for a good long time. And right now we're actually doing everything in our power to actually make that one of the most important things in the company. But there's a challenge in the way, which is to say, okay, if design is going to be as important as we want it to be, how does that sink into this way of working that we're pretty excited about? And that's where it seems to be working pretty well. And what I'll do is I'll basically just walk you through an illustrative example that should sum up all of these different, all 3 myths into kind of one big experience. So this here is what it used to look like when you want to start a Meetup group. And for everybody who is watching at home on the simulcast through Meetup groups, I really appreciate you doing this. But we basically used to go through this kind of clunky 5-step process that was completely uninspired. So we did usability testing on it. We knew exactly where people would struggle, where their pain points were, where they were uninspired or bored. And we had a debate, or we kind of had a brainstorm. We were discussing about what could we do about it. And the next day, our main designer kind of came in with something that he just hacked together really quickly. So let's actually cut to a live demo of it. So this is basically not hosted on Meetup. This is hosted just off of a different URL. And it's just dumb JavaScript. But let's say I want to create a Meetup group that says, hi, my name is Andres. I want to start an outdoor Meetup. I'm interested. I want it to be called, let's call it Lean Hikers. And so we were excited. We saw this. We were excited about it. It was just a simple way of kind of thinking about this prototype of an idea of an experience we wanted to create. It was hacked together super fast, and we were so thrilled with it that later that day there was somebody coming in. So we said, great, there's somebody coming in for user test in an hour. Let's just drop it into usability testing and see what happens. And what do you think happened? Yeah, people hated it. It didn't make any sense to them. It made tons of sense to us, but it was a complete mess of a mental process. So we went back to the drawing board, and over the next several weeks, we basically did this same process many times, iterating, until we arrived at something a little bit more like this, which we've kind of done the Julia Child thing to kind of make it look a little bit more prepared. But you basically go through a series of steps, and you fill out. You fill out. You click next, and then boom. There's this final step that people seem to embrace. So we basically rearranged the entire experience, and it became much more dynamic, much more interesting. And we finally got it to a place where people were pretty excited about it while we were testing them. And then we went back to it. We said, okay, we love it. Let's do it. So in the old days, we probably would have locked ourselves in a room for about 3 months and then rebuilt the whole thing and launched it. And instead, we basically thought to ourselves, well, all right, how do we go from this to that vision? And the way we did it is we first started by saying, okay, well, the first core idea here is that people are going to get excited about the interaction, which is what we saw in usability. So let's test that in. Let's see if that works. So we basically adjusted. The first thing we tested was kind of almost the identical experience of a 5-step flow, but the first page became more systematic and stepped. Then that seemed to work, so then we got rid of a step 2. We got rid of a theme picker. And then we merged a third thing in. And then we basically arrived at where we are today. We're actually only about halfway done, but if you go to meetup.com/create or /create, you'll see, you can start a group and you can see where we're at in the process as opposed to where we want to go. So basically, the lesson learned here is that really, in general, that vision guides experiments, and we've learned that these experiments then have to come back and validate our vision. And so as quickly as we possibly can, we want to see, is the thing that we're really excited about from a vision going to actually manifest itself in the experience? And if it's true, we'll see it in the results. And if it's not, then we're smoking something, and we should actually focus more of our time on something else that's going to be much more meaningful. So that's me. I'm from New York. I talk quick. Happy to chat with you guys here. But I'm especially interested in while I'm out here talking to folks who are equally passionate about lean startup and from a product and from a design point of view. So if you're one of those people, come talk to me this weekend.